specifically is this. One of the assumptions that I think a biographer starts with is of some level of consistency in the life and thinking of their subject, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether you were startled by the many lives encompassed by Aguirre's life. How, the inconsistencies, the contradictions, how did you unravel them? And is Aguirre unusual in this respect, or do you think every biographer should look for such complexities and complexities everyone would look for,
Yeah.
but contradictions and inconsistencies?
Uh, Thank you, Nirja. See, his consistency, there is, in Hindi world, if there is one writer, about him there is kind of a myth bigger than, say, Premchand or any other Hindi writer, it's Aggay. It's partly because of these multiple lives that he led. And each life that we're talking about of a revolutionary or of a British soldier, of joining the British army, has a myth around it, and no one knew the fact. Those who loved him, those who hated him. And Hindi world is kind of vertically divided in that respect. So thankfully, what Aggad did, he had a sense of vanity. So he kept these papers very well. But still there were long gaps. And you will find that controversial periods of his life were not there in the papers. So I was I was aware of his inconsistencies through the myths that one had heard of or read, but his papers kind of took me there, and the gaps, which be it the CIA connection or be his revolutionary life, and then I realized that it's kind of his part of his life. His only thing consistent about him is that he's fiercely ambitious, and in that he's consistent. Even when he is in the British Army, he's focused on bringing out a journal when the war gets over and when he returns to Allahabad. So even when marriage is his relationships are going haywire, he's consistent about doing something about his writing. So his writing somehow is consistent. His writing life is very consistent about. Otherwise, his life is full of inconsistencies, contradictions, and he's a master of that. Yeah.
Thanks. Could you, I was wondering, this is an audience in Bangalore, and could you, for a Bangalorean audience, paint us very briefly a broad brush picture of the Hindi literary landscape, of the literary trends, the personalities, and so on, and of Aguirre's place in it, so that everyone has a sense of context.
Yeah. So we have, if we look at the larger Hindi world, which people even in Bangalore would be aware of, Premchand. So Premchand era ends sometime in the early 1930s, and in a way, Aggay's era starts. He's questioning everything that Premchand is doing. He brings individual. He's this deep, writing about the interior lives, writing about this whole psychological thing happening in the individual, and which leftists never liked. He said he's talking more about the individual than the community. So, and in that he starts a whole lot of new things, what is called experimentalism in Hindi literature, of Hindi poetry. He brings this series called Tar Saptak, which is called Septet. And he brings it regular interval, 4 of them, Tar Saptak, Dusra Saptak, and so on and so forth, where he brings in new writers Hindi who are ideologically even opposed to him. In fact, the very first collection, anthology, Tar Saptak, has 5 poets who are Marxists, who hated him throughout his life. So he brings that modernism, he brings that new thing, and you find his legatees are Nirmal Verma, and a new Nai Kavita leads to Nai Kahani, and Nai Kahani leads to whole lot of new generation of writers, Mohan Rakesh, Nirmal Verma, and we go on, and there are this whole generation of writers. In fact, they continue to be influenced by him and that generation even now. So that roughly is his legacy, and also bringing so much from Western literature, interacting with them, collaborating with them. So that's larger thing that Aggay did. And as you know, Premchand's son Sripat Rai always used to joke that there are only 2 Indians misborn misborn. One is Nehru and one is Aggay. So he was like that larger than life image. Was very modern. He was so unlike the Hindi world. Yeah.
So that actually brings me directly to my next question for you, which is that he was a polymath.
Yeah.
He was not just bilingual, he was multilingual. He was interested in translation, did it himself. And unlike most of his peers in the Hindi literary firmament, he was a cosmopolitan, as you show us, both in his writing and in the way he lived his life. But you also show us another side of him which veers gradually towards in the direction of Hindi linguistic chauvinism.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether you could reflect on his cosmopolitanism, on this transition, and also on his interactions with writers in other parts of India, which I
Yeah.
think is again quite distinctive
Yeah.
for Agye in the Hindi literary world.
Yeah. His cosmopolitanism actually comes from the way he grew up. He, unlike the Hindi writers of his generation or even subsequent generation, he was growing all over the country. His father was one of India's eminent archaeologists and epigraphists. He grew up in South India. He grew up in Utkaman, then goes to Madras Christian College, where he does extremely well in science. Then he goes to Foreman Christian College, and he's constantly learning. He's learning, trying to learn Tamil, which he could never do. He knows Urdu, Persian. So his cosmopolitanism partly comes from there. And his readings are so very different from the world. When he's in jail in the late 1920s, he's writing to, say, a senior writer like Jainendra. He's giving him a reading list. Not only giving him a reading list, even telling him whether his books are available in Delhi. You know, so, and he's reading, and he has read everything by the age of 19. It's so remarkable. If you read his one list of 14 books of Russian writers, he's talking about Proust, he's talking about all kinds of writers. So his cosmopolitanism comes from there, but somewhere he gets, and he's very sure about it, that one should only write in one's own language. And every time, there is a big archive interview he gave to Duke University where someone said that, okay, what about Nabokov? He said, don't give me the exception, it only proves my rule. And so he became what you say Hindi chauvinist, bordering on Hindi chauvinism. And there's this big debate, one Kannada writer who's, I'm not getting his name, one Mr. Raghavendra, who took him on actually for propagating too much of this language thing and dismissing language, English. Agye was very dismissive of English writers, Indian writers in English. So Mulk Rajanand was his friend. He said he doesn't know how to write. Everyone, I think, except little bit, one writer I'm forgetting, he said, yeah, he knows a little bit of English. But at the same time, look at the contradiction. A man who's constantly saying you write in your own language is also working overtime to get himself translated with someone, and is collaborating with leading American poets like Leonard Nathan, Josephine Miles, Josephine Miles is one who found Allen Ginsberg. And he's interacting, she's translated Nirala. So there is this whole contradiction, and that's where his cosmopolitanism comes from. His background, his larger reading, and his concerns are very civilizational, and somehow very influenced by Tagore. Early years, the Calcutta years, he's highly influenced by Tagore. And he thinks you need to have a civilizational enterprise. Therefore, after a point, beyond a writer, he becomes this this public intellectual who's talking on everything.
That's very interesting because in the early part of the book, you actually talk about how he says he dreams in English and writes in English and so on. But
And
then,
he did. In fact, his classic Sekhar Ek Jibni, the first draft is in English, which is writing on the back of these court papers in his solitary confinement in Lahore.
So one is tempted to think that through your book, Agye, or the unknowable, has become gay, or the known or the knowable. Do you think Agye would agree?
No, he won't agree. Because there's still shades of it. Because a lot of people asked me questions about, and they're very right questions. Because even when I was digging archives, and I was digging archives all over, the certain individuals in his life about whom we don't know, suddenly they disappear. What happened to them? Certain ideas, what happened to them? So Agye kept, like for instance, despite the book coming and having gone through those 20 trunks of private papers and talking to everyone, there is this myth about third volume of Sekhar Ek Jivni. Because he kept telling people, he kept fooling people right from the late 40s, saying, oh, there is a third volume. People will say, where is it? Oh, I'm trying to change it. So he played these mind games with the larger public, with the Hindi world, and Hindi world still believes. And a lot of people told me, oh, you haven't been able to unravel it. So maybe there is a third volume lying somewhere. And after the book came, someone said it's lying with someone in Banaras, which I'm trying to figure out who's it. But then it's one of the myth of Agay. And he loved being this unknowable. I don't think some bit of light I've been able to throw, but Agay remains Agay, you know. Yeah.
Which is at odds a little bit, you will admit, with the fact that you leave behind 3 trunks of private papers,
Yeah.
carefully and meticulously preserved.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you do at one level want to be known.
Yeah,
even if not
a
in
lot of things do get settled. His so-called CIA connection, his revolutionary years, his joining British Army, all those things, what it meant. So those some few things get settled. His relationship with women, largely extractive relationship with women, that more or less gets settled. Everyone used to talk about it, and now we have that. And he maintained those papers, even relationships where he was like kind of, he was very, very kind of, you can use the word, want a better word, cruel to all the women he was with. So he maintained, so that more or less gets kind of, there's some new light has been thrown on it. I don't know whether it's a final thing. Maybe someone will have more on Agay, who knows? Yeah.
I think it would be interesting for our audience to hear a little about the CIA controversy, the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
Okay, so
and that association.
what happened in 1950, CIA set up this thing called Congress for Cultural Freedom to deal with this large, this rising tide of communism all over the world. And in 1951, immediately, the very next year, a center, kind of a branch of CCF came up called ICCF, in which everyone was involved. Meenu Masani, Agay was the secretary, and many others. Finally, it was to happen in Delhi, but last minute, 10 days before the event, Nehru cancelled it, said we are not allowing any political events to happen in Delhi. It moved to Bombay in record time in those days, and everyone came from Arthur Koestler, you name it, Ambedkar, Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, she was there, everyone came. And Agay was the main force behind it, that particular meeting. But there was allegation of corruption against him after that, and he had to leave. But he maintained personal relationship with some of these writers for long. For instance, Nicholas Nabokov. Nicholas Nabokov became his very, very good friend. Then there's another gentleman who was a philosopher and James Burnham. James Burnham became his very, very good friend, and they maintained that relationship. So that was about his so-called CIA connection, and later on he had this famous Rockford Foundation fellowships and all these things which were helping him stint in teaching in US and all that. And he was also the man behind setting up some of these South Asian language departments in US. For instance, one of the most prestigious one is in Wisconsin, Madison, which Agay was being consulted, who to hire, not to hire. Similarly in Chicago University, Salk, he's the person he's telling them what to do. And he taught in Berkeley himself for, I think, overall 2 years to put together. Yeah.
So should a biographer or must a biographer always like their subject? I mean, how did you feel about Agay before you started working on the biography? And did your feelings about Agay change afterwards?
Not much. I knew he was a complicated guy from what I read, because why else will a Hindi world will be so much fighting about one man? You know, I remember when the centenary happened in 2011, there were still people who were writing very nasty pieces about him. Even when I was doing the book and I did some 60 interviews, there were some people who were trying to fix him even after his death. So, yeah, so there was something about him. I don't know whether I liked him. I liked his writing. I like his writings even now. I consider some of his stories and poems extraordinary. His larger intervention, his life as a journalist. I think no one brought a better Hindi political weekly than Dinman. No, even in English, no one came closer to what Dinman was doing. Science writer. His writing on science in Hindi is extraordinary. So, but then, that his personal space, he was a very, very different person. He wanted, even as I think 20-year-old, his younger sister, Anandlata, knew that he wants to win Nobel Prize, and she'll tease him. So he had those ambitions. So you see these contradictions. He's trying to be very aloof. If you ask anyone about Agge, he says, "Oh God," everyone calls him Chuppa, which is he's a recluse. He maintains that. But deep within, he's a fiercely ambitious man. So you find these contradictions, you like him, and in a way it was good to humanize him. There's so much myth about him. You find he's like us in many ways.
Is this very different from the biography you are now working on, Jayaprakash Narayan?
Yes. Jayaprakash Narayan is a very interesting person, but then Jayaprakash Narayan is highly boring. He's highly boring. He's like, my God, I don't know. If you look at his papers, and his papers are some 3 lakh pages, his own private papers, and papers associated with him all over US and other places. Someone has consciously, clinically removed anything that can happen about his personal life. We don't know. We only hear tales about his life, about his personal space. Otherwise, yes. And there's 2 different people. They were very close. Agge and Jayaprakash Narayan were very close. In fact, Everyman's Weekly that JP launched, first editor was Agge. He brought him. They were very close. At one point, he was close to Lohia, but later they were very closely associated. So it's markedly different. It's interesting characters. One's like immensely boring. One is highly interesting. So it's like a new journey altogether.
So after your Gita Press book, this is the 2nd biography you're writing. And so quickly, as we close, I think our session is in 5 minutes. Okay, so Akshay, you have 5 minutes to talk about the joys and the challenges of writing biography.
See, one of the things, Ram is here, so I have kind of picked his brain endlessly on writing biography. What I keep reading someone like Leon Edel, who wrote that Henry James biography, and this theory of that there is this constant battle between the biographer and the subject, between the revealed self and the concealed self, between the private sphere and the public sphere. My standard thing has been, at least with Agge, and I'm trying to do as much as with JP, is not to brush anything under the carpet, write chronologically, and nothing, even the worst thing that I write about Agge or Jayaprakash Narayan, which might shock the reader, but will not take away the greatness of these people. So I just try to write as it is. Don't fall for, because even with JP, I spent, full day with a politician I would not like to name, who is a very big politician now, and everyone calls themselves legatee of Jayaprakash Narayan. And some other politician got to know that I had met him. So he asked, you spent a day with him. He was nobody. And so, there's this constant battle happening. So I have now kind of decided to kind of give up this interview as a tool of biography writing, at least for these people, because these are highly controversial figures. And with JP also, the problem is, if you talk to people, it's as if JP was born in 1970, took on Indira Gandhi and died in 1979. JP had a huge life before that, very interesting life. When he gave up full-time politics in the late 50s, early 60s, and till for good 1 decade, he was like all over the world, and which people don't want to talk about.
Also at Berkeley.
Also at Berkeley.
Also at Berkeley.
And even in America, the life that he has. That's right. I just discovered some 200 pages of interview he gave to Henry Passin, God knows when, where he's talked like dispassionately about his life in America, which he never did to any Indian ever. He's talking about all kinds of things. So he led a very interesting life in America, and that has not been written in great detail.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and many congratulations again.